Good morning, everybody. We'll just get started in a few minutes. Okay, good morning, everybody. And just while a few more of us are joining, thank you for joining us this morning. I hope everybody's survived the very stormy weather last night. And today we're going to be talking about collaborate to elevate, bringing the right people on board. So it's all about the people today. So I'm just going to move on to cover off some of the webinar etiquette for this morning. So just to say that the session is being recorded. As you'll see, there is a Q&A box, and this is for any questions that you have. So we really do encourage as many questions, from you as delegates to make the most use of this time. So please do put them in, and we will have some dedicated time to cover those through the session. And obviously as well, if there's any that we don't get to cover in time, that we will follow up with afterwards. There's also a chat box, and that's for any technical support questions or any more general questions for us as the organisers. So my colleague Rebecca is in the background and she'll be keeping an eye on that. So if you have any more technical questions, if you use the chat box and the Q&A box for questions for Sarah or myself. And then also just to check that your microphone is on mute. So I'm Joyce Harman. I'm Senior Client Relationship Manager at Heart Square, and I'm absolutely delighted to have with me today Sarah Ferreira from Mind. Sarah, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Yes, of course. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Ferreira. I am currently the Head of Supporter Relations for Projects at Mind. I know it's an unusual title for an organisation or charity. At Mind, as we have seen sort of lots of growth and lots of our strategies being put in place, we realised that we didn't have the capacity to start implementing those strategies, especially the cross-working, team ones or the cross-organisational ones. So we have this role at the moment, which is on a secondment basis, in a way where I'm focusing currently on projects for the growth of our strategy and our ambition.
Fantastic, thanks, Sarah. And I said that, I think that's really interesting that, Mind have taken that decision to bring in that role. I mean, I think it's fantastic. So thank you. So just really quickly, for those of you who don't know us at Heart Square, I suppose really just to say the important part here is that we are independent of any technology or partners, and that we work only in the not-for-profit sector. So I'm just going to run a quick poll, so if you bear with me while I bring this up. And the poll is very much just, it kind of gives an understanding of who's with us today. So the question is, do you have a clear understanding of the key stakeholders required in your project? So it might be that a project that you're currently working on, or a project that you're about to embark on. So I'll just give that another few seconds, and let me end the poll, and I will share the results with you. So the good thing to say is that the majority of you have said yes, so that's really good. But interestingly, we've still probably got a good, at least a good sort of 30–35% that are either between the unsure or the no's, which I equally think is quite, the unsure is quite an interesting one. So hopefully after today, it'll kind of give you some ideas of thinking about sort of, who your stakeholders need to be or how you should engage with them. So if I just stop sharing that. So just wanted to cover off before I bring Sarah in, just sort of some of the key points or things that we see on projects that we run. So some of the common challenges is around not having a clear engagement plan, not understanding who the key stakeholders you need to engage with are, because on every project, there's various different types of stakeholders, and they need to be all engaged with in different ways. And it's very important that at the start of the project that you've thought about how you're going to engage, what are the different stages of engagement, what are the different touch points, how you're going to engage, what do those activities look like. So a big challenge that we see in projects where people just haven't thought about that. Also, there's an awful lot of focus on, for example, if it was a CRM project or, website project, if it's a technology project, that the focus is very much on the technology, getting the system live. And I suppose the point on this is to say is that you cannot do a project at people. You have to be bringing people along with them. So obviously the technology side of it's really important because you're implementing a system, but not getting so bogged down in the technical side of things that you completely forget about the people. Because at the end of the day, they are the people who are going to be using whatever the new system or technology is afterwards. And if they're not bought in throughout as to why things are happening, it'll cause problems later on. The point on skills, this is really more around thinking about the soft skills. So when you're talking about stakeholder engagement and change management, it's very much about, it's that engagement with people. And there's a difference, and a slide I'll come on to in a second, there's a difference between a project management approach and a change management approach. And very often the skills that are required for, that change management approach, that stakeholder engagement piece, are much more softer skills, because you don't really want somebody who's, a very sort of hard line approach that might not be the best person to help engage with people. So thinking of the skill set, the personalities involved, and who is the best person to lead that, it often gets forgotten about. Very often say, well, this person is going to do it. We've ticked that resourcing box. But have you asked the question, have they got the right skill set, the soft skills, to be able to really fit that role correctly? As I've said, for sort of getting buy-in from the start, where if people don't know why a project is happening, what are the benefits going to be for them? Why are they really going to get very interested? Why are they going to go out of the way to really engage with the project? So getting buy-in from the start, making sure that people understand why you're doing it, what difference it's going to make to them. And then looking at culture, and I know Sarah's going to talk about this a bit more. Every organisation has a different culture, and sometimes there's different cultures even within different departments or different teams. So being very aware of the culture and what works for you, because what might work for one organisation might not be exactly right for you, or might not be right for a different team. So thinking about your culture and taking that on board when thinking about how you're going to sort of run and manage the project. And then I suppose finally on this one, lack of regular review. Very often when talking about engagement or change management or any of those kind of things, it's, there's a danger to say, we thought about it at the start, we'll retouch it at the end, and then you forget that whole key middle point. So making sure that you constantly review, how is it going? How are people engaging with the project? All of those kind of things. That is not kind of just a one exercise really. So then talking about sort of the sort of two states of change. So on any project, what you're really trying to do in very basic terms, and if I give an example again of, say, for a CRM system. So you might be on an older legacy CRM system, or a system that's just not working for you very well. And so therefore people have a lot of their own workarounds, dare I say, their own spreadsheets hidden away in other places, things like that. And that's your kind of your current state. And you've made the decision that you want to, move away from that state, and that the transition phase in this example would be very much, okay, you're now going to do requirements for what the new system needs to be. You're going to go through the discovery, user acceptance testing, training, all on the implementation phase. And there is an awful lot of change and an awful lot of work that happens in that transition phase. And it's about making sure that everybody's brought along that whole transition phase to get to that target state, which in this example would be your system has gone live, everybody who's supposed to be using it is using it, the workarounds have gone, the secret spreadsheets have gone, but everybody is very much bought into it and they're happily using the system. So looking at the kind of the two different roles as such, you've got the business and technical change. As I said before, some people get too obsessed with the technical, but the technical is important, but that requires a project management approach. And that is very much more, it is around delivering the technology, the data migration, the integrations. It's very much more a technical side of things. Then there's the people side, and that's the bit that often gets forgotten about. And this needs a change management approach. And that is really just all about helping the individuals who are going to be impacted by this change to adapt and to be successful, for whatever the project is. Then looking at some, and some of these, these are not groundbreaking, but there's some things to kind of think about. And I know Sarah also has some great ideas and some of the things that they're doing in mind. But looking at through your project, some of the things to think about, planning and resourcing the change, making sure that you've thought about it, who's going to do what are the roles and responsibilities. Having a launch event or a launch activity. I know for some clients that we work with, for whatever the technology project is, they often like to name the project so that people, it's a bit more tangible, and they do an activity to kind of, agree the name, things like that. But having a think about how you can make people engage with the projects, and doing something a bit exciting at the start of it. Engaging people through that, say that transition phase, that build and development stage. There's an awful lot of work that's required, and not just focusing on doing the technical bit, checking in, how are people finding it? Is there any challenges? Is there any problems? Do they need extra support? And constantly reviewing that throughout the whole stage. And then business as usual. People have their day jobs on every project. And so making sure that you're having those conversations about the impact that the project is having on their workload, and that what other help or support is needed. Or is there enough engagement? Do they feel that they can feed back to the wider team? And also just, keeping all of the work that you're doing around stakeholder engagement, keep it going throughout the project. Maybe looking at putting together some, internal engagement groups, looking at what is the best way to manage that. And then finally, I bring Sarah in, think about communication. Very, very obvious points, but very often these are things that we see get forgotten about. So remember that most people are going to be in the dark about the project unless you tell them about it. Now, I know that sounds very, very obvious, but very often there can be a limited group of people who decide that this change is going to happen. And there might be a limited group of people that are involved in even the requirements gathering. But something if it's going to be organisational wide, you need to tell them, and you need to tell them the benefits of why this is being done. Very importantly, there's lots of different milestones on a project. Celebrate the successes at the different milestones. Be shouting about, we've ticked off phase one, or we've finished discovery and we've agreed the scope. Celebrating all those different things and keeping people aware. Updating people on what's happening. I have sort of suggested here bi-weekly updates. That might be far too much for some organisations, and you might say monthly is enough, or even every couple of months. Again, your organisation best. But the most important bit is really on those updates, is to keep them brief. Nobody wants big, long-winded novels to read. Brief, honest, and balanced. So, you want to keep people up to date in the project. They don't need to know the ins and outs of the nitty-gritty, but, so keeping it brief, honest, and balanced. Looking at the different users that are going to be impacted with the projects, and very much thinking about what are the benefits going to be for those types of users, and very much selling those benefits to them. As with all projects, there's going to be some people that are going to be skeptical. Either this is, there's a lot of projects running and they're thinking, oh God, it's another one. How am I going to do this? Or I'm not really bought into why we're doing this. So some are going to have mixed feelings. That's absolutely normal. It happens on all projects. But the best thing is to be aware of them, to manage them, and to have conversations with those people to help bring them on board. And a good way of doing that as well is having good channels for feedback, for people to put in suggestions for issues. But again, making sure that if you have that feedback channel, that you then feedback on the feedback. Don't just ask for feedback and do nothing with it, because that's the one way to make sure that people will not engage in the project, or they'll stop engaging in the project. And then I suppose finally is to say, make it clear that you're 100% behind the project. There will be problems along the way, there always are, but don't let any sort of niggles or problems, bring in negativity across the board, because it's very easy for a simple comment to then kind of get spread around, and then there's this perception that the project's not going well, or things like that. So, positive attitude, obviously issues need to be dealt with, but making sure that issues don't get spread out to the wider organisation, unnecessarily. So enough from me. So I'm going to bring in Sarah. So Sarah, thanks again for joining us. So could you just, I suppose, quickly just give us a brief overview of Mind and the services that you offer?
Yes, of course. So Mind's here to make sure that no one has to face a mental health problem alone. Mind provides advice and support. This is to empower anyone experiencing a mental health problem. And Mind also campaigns to improve services, to raise awareness, promote understanding, working with government, working with local authorities. So it's quite broad what Mind does and offer.
Thank you. So you embarked on a large CRM project recently, and I know you're running a number of other projects at the moment. Could you sort of share your approach to projects to understand who are your key stakeholders and how you influence them?
Yes, of course. So once you've got your scope of the project, the impact that you're trying to achieve, what the deliverables are, it's very key from the very beginning, exactly like you explained earlier, to think about your stakeholders from the very, very beginning, almost from the business case drawing up point of view. You know, we need to think about who are the doers, who are their managers, who are their heads, what teams that this project touch. So there'll be teams where they won't be directly involved in the project, but for example, do we need digital informed? Do we need the compliance team informed? Do we need HR, for example, informed? Are they going to have an interest in what happens, even if they are not specifically involved in this project? So thinking about all types of stakeholders. We believe, we like sort of telling a story. You know, we know that telling a story brings people on board, that it allows people to envisage the change and what it means for them in terms of delivering this project. And tailoring our communications is very, very important. So, for example, a senior member of staff might be more interested in knowing, you know, what costs will this project save? What impact will it have? What risks might it have to deliver or not to deliver? Whereas a more junior member of staff might be more interested in, for example, how their life could be made easier by the efficiencies that we could bring to their day-to-day role, what could be less painful, how they could possibly spend their time on more value-added activity rather than, for example, manual processes that they're doing at the moment that we want to automate, as an example. And making sure that we are influencing by tailoring, but also knowing who to talk to and when to talk to. So what you've mentioned earlier as well, Joyce, is about making sure that we bring everybody very, very early on board and having those difficult conversations with some groups that we know might be more difficult and some others might be sort of easier to get to.
Perfect, thank you. And I think it's a really valid point about the different levels of seniority, absolutely, because there is not a one-size-fits-all communication, absolutely not. There's very different priorities across the organisation. Thanks for that. I know when we previously spoke before the session, we were talking about the importance of stakeholder maps, and I know for a lot of people with us this morning might not really know what that is or how to go about it. So from your point of view, how would you approach the development of a stakeholder map?
Yeah, so stakeholder map should go in conjunction with a communications plan. So we need to think about listing all of our stakeholders. And what's also quite helpful is grouping those stakeholders. So for example, if we have the doers attending a workshop, so those would be the subject matter experts that are attending for a specific topic, we'd probably group all of those together. Then we might need to group different people across the organization in terms of, for example, managers that need to be kept informed, or managers that are going to be influencing decisions, for example. And for example, project team members. I work in supporter relations very closely to the data and CRM team. So I need my close stakeholders as well to be almost in a group for regular communications, or also for delegating sort of pieces of work to. We need to think about, like I've just mentioned, who needs to be kept informed, who needs to be kept consulted. And what's helpful is almost putting them in a graph. I'm sure most people have seen this sort of graph where you are listing people or mapping people across their influence versus their interest in the project. So as an example, a project sponsor might be very interested in where the project goes, but might also be very influential in terms of the change that we can bring in. Whereas another team member might be very interested in the results of the project, but may not have the influence to change. It's really important to map this out, in terms of it's not a very long exercise. It's one of those ones when I recently completed one and I changed it completely almost the next day, because you've got to sort of really think about it and think about where these groups lie. When you're doing all of this, it's about also ensuring that we're fusing, you know, people, culture and processes together. So when we think about the interest and the influence, it's about ensuring that we are almost going, you know, tackling all those items and all those issues in one go by speaking to the right people at the right time. Mapping out people's involvement is also very key. Who is going to be needed when? Who do we approach at what point? Obviously, you know, a RASCI is very important in this stakeholder map as well.
Perfect, thank you. That's really interesting, and I like your point as well about, you know, you did the stakeholder map, but then kind of reviewed it again the next day and kind of changed it a bit. And I think that's also a really good learning point, isn't it? It's just because you've done it once, don't take it as that's it. It's set in stone. Kind of that review piece. I think, yeah, that's a really, really good point. Looking at you know, one of the challenges we all know in projects is around, you know, the team, what the team structure is, and all of those kind of things. Do you have a preferred team structure for projects?
Yes, it also does depend on the project. There are projects that are smaller, there are projects that are larger. We have just launched an income improvement project across Mind, which is huge. It's about ensuring that we improve all of our income processes, all of our automations, internally as well as externally, ensuring that the supporter experience is enhanced, but our internal processes are enhanced as well, and our systems can support our income processing, especially as Mind is growing. So with a project of this size, we have proposed, you know, a standard project team in terms of having, you know, project lead who is, you know, managing, driving and delivering the project. In this instance, that's myself. And then we've got within the project team, we have our developers, we have a business system design person from our CRM team, we have, you know, the mapping experts, we have people that we'll bring in later on, depending on the topics, in terms of a process expert, a process owner, a product owner. And it's very key from the very beginning to what you've mentioned as well, to make sure that we have the roles and responsibilities very, very clearly lined out from the beginning, so that everybody understands their role within this project structure, and what they bring in and at what point we go to them, as opposed to blurring lines, because it's very easy. A process owner might be, you know, the doer, for example, but a product owner might be the team manager. So that might be the person that will do the ultimate decision making, but the process owner will have the understanding in and out of the actual process, but also have the accountability to produce the information, you know, the right information, and work with us to ensure that we are mapping out specific process. A project sponsor is also very, very key. So we need to also ensure that we've got that seniority of a group that we report to in terms of the progress of the project. This project was actually so popular at Mind in terms of the organisation being so keen that it went ahead. We've had lots of requests from sort of other senior members of the organisation to be co-project sponsors. Okay. So we had a project sponsor, and then I believe we had about 6 co-sponsors. Now we have a team in the organisation called Change Management, organisational change team, sorry. I was speaking to the head of this team about this structure, and she sort of recommended that when she had worked before as a co-sponsor on a project, it did blur the lines. It wasn't very clear who was going to be the ultimate decision maker. So we decided to frame them as project partners. So having one sponsor and several project partners. I've gone back to you know, the people that we wanted to be obviously very involved in this project and proposed this structure to them, and everybody was very happy. So it does work, but it means that we've got our sponsor who can be the ultimate decision maker, who could be the person that we go to for, you know, if there's a big risk, if there's an urgent issue that we need to clear, as opposed to going to a big group. But it will be this group that we're part of a board that will be reporting to on a monthly basis in terms of the project progress, any risks that are happening, you know, high level key information, where we need their support, any project milestones, etc. So sorry, that was quite long-winded, but we have a project team, you know, your project lead, we have your sponsor as well, and yeah, mapping out the resource and the roles and responsibilities from very beginning, and agreeing that before the project begins is very key.
Perfect. I mean, I just think that's fantastic, and I love that so many people were keen and wanting to be co-sponsors. And I know for a lot of the delegates with us today, they won't really have thought of a co-sponsor role, but as you said, I think the really key important part on that is the ultimate responsibility and decision maker. You can't have too many decision makers, that will never work. And doing that project partner approach, I think that's fantastic, and I think that's a really good idea that I think a lot of people could use on the projects, because as you say, if people are enthusiastic, you don't want to knock that enthusiasm, you want to engage that and bring that on board. So yeah, I love that. I think that's great. So talking about organizational culture, it often gets forgotten about in projects. Do you have a particular approach about how you manage this?
Yeah, as we know, every organisation has its own culture, and as you've said, every team almost has its own culture as well. So we know culture is values and behaviours, what we do, in order to deliver on our objectives. And Mind is very on sort of being open and responsive, together and unstoppable. So there's this sense of urgency in terms of what we need to do and how we need to do it. There's also a big priority on growth. So Mind is growing almost without needing to, because obviously of the nature of the world at the moment, but also it is part of our objectives. So a lot of our approach was tailored around our objectives at Mind. So we know that if we need to grow, we know that if we need to be bigger and better and, you know, futuristic, we need to make sure that our foundations, for example, in our project, which is ensuring that our income processing from the very bottom is robust and it's, you know, 21st century, to be able to support the organization moving on and growing. So this was almost sort of my messaging in terms of why we need to do this, and I tailored it to the fact that this was sort of our vision and mission, etc. I'm not one to shy away from asking for support and asking for people to be brought on, you know, to the project. I have reached out to the organisational change team, and I've sort of said, you know, I need support with ensuring that we are supporting this project within Mind's culture and being able to break any barriers down. Because yes, I understand the fundraising culture quite well, I understand the organisation quite well, but there may be other items that I am missing out of this. So I am actually going to be working very closely with somebody from the organisational change team to be focusing on culture throughout the project, as opposed to just thinking about it at the very beginning. And then, like you said, you know, sometimes we plan things, but we don't always follow them up because there's so much that we need to be doing on a daily basis. We need to, you know, working through the culture is about as well understanding where decisions are made, who needs to come on board, is there any negativity that we need to tackle. So you've mentioned as well earlier that there are sometimes people or groups that are tired of, we've heard this before, this has happened before, or we're very busy, nothing's going to change, nothing changes, etc. It's about having those difficult conversations. So we had a team in particular, a very large influential team at Mind that felt that, you know, we don't really have time to send attendees to your workshops at the moment, because what does this mean? What is it going to change? So I was invited to their heads meeting, and after 20 minutes of just a face-to-face conversation, answering really the crux of, you know, asking the honest questions of what are your concerns, what is your team saying, how can we support you, and explaining what it is that we are going to do for them. At the end of those 20 minutes, they were so supportive that they you know, one, their head is actually a project sponsor, a project partner in our project at the moment, and they were so enthusiastic that, you know, they sort of said nobody in the organization could deliver this like we can, because they now have the answers that they didn't have before. So this is what happens when communication gets trickled down, an email doesn't get read, or we rely on one person to share that information across the team. For example, you send a head's email, hoping that that head is going to go into detail with their managers and team members, but perhaps it doesn't always happen. So going to the people themselves and answering those questions did make sure. And sorry, I know I'm I'm making this into a long-winded
No, it's
answer.
fantastic. It's brilliant, Sarah.
Lastly, well-being is very key at Mind. Staff well-being, making sure that our mental health is being looked after, but also that we don't sort of burn out. And this was very, very key in our business case and also in our communications in speaking to people, that with the result of X, Y, and Z, staff well-being will be improved, because currently they are spending, we collected lots of data in terms of they're spending, 30 hours a week on X process, whereas we can actually save them 25 hours a week if we improve such process, which we know, of course, will improve people's well-being.
Fantastic, Sarah. Oh, I mean, I could talk to you all day long on this stuff. And I think it's, definitely it might seem like a minor detail, and it's really not at all, is the point of, the fact you took that time, took that 20 minutes to actually give people an opportunity to talk and share their concerns. And then people just feel more bought in to think, well, she bothered to come and talk to me, and she listened, and that's the point. She listened and she actioned on it. And also around, you can't just presume that because, as you say, maybe the heads of, they've been sent the email, you can't guarantee it's going to be forwarded on or they're going to discuss it. So, really, really, really key points. Absolutely fantastic. So looking at sort of, all the many projects you've got going on, what kind of project activities are planned to support the change management as part of, the current projects that you're doing?
So change management, the main principle is that it's about people. It's about bringing people on board and ensuring that the change happens within people. So this should also go in conjunction almost with a communication plan as well. Are people aware of the change? What is the change? Why are we doing the change? Do they have the knowledge and skills to apply this change? It's no good in bringing something nice and shiny and lovely if we're not training the people to be able to use it on a daily basis. Also being really clear about what project management is and what change management is. A project manager isn't a magician. A project manager cannot do everything and anything, and it's very key to learn very early on who should take on, sort of like what you've said, there's the your harder skills and then your softer skills. And it's not to say that a project manager can't be both, but a project manager also has a lot of work in their hands to be able to do this. So we're looking at change management, and I'm ensuring that, one, we are working with our organisational change team on change management, but also that I've got a team member within the project who is going to be focusing on change management as well, and the supporter experience side of things. So we've got lots of technical people, we've got lots of people that are doing the mapping and the talking and etc. And then I want somebody to be focused on what does this mean at the end of it for the external result, as opposed to only the internal result. Obviously change is about embedding it and making sure that people adopt it. So exactly, you've touched on this earlier, we can do all this fantastic work for 18 months, deliver it, and then nobody actually takes on the change. So with the implementation side of things and with the testing side of things, we're going to introduce a 30, 60, 90 days touch points. So to ensure that not only we've tested, not only we've trained, not only we've ensured that, this team can come back to us in terms of, how their new process is going to work going forward, we have touching points every 30 days for the next 3 months to make sure that, is this working? Does it need any amends? Do we need any retraining? Do we need to change our approach? Is it maybe not working how we thought it should work and we need to almost go back to the drawing board? But making sure that this adoption continues and then it becomes a habit, and in no time people will forget about the pain and they'll be all about how it is at the moment. So yes, there's a lot to think about in terms of change management and the implementation of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose then, going on to the next question and talking about all the change and all the different things that need to be done, do you have any specific approaches to try and avoid project fatigue? Because we know, we've mentioned, but it is a big challenge on a project.
Yes, absolutely. When we were working on the CRM delivery project, we it took slightly longer than we had anticipated, because whenever we finished a phase, we realized we had to uncover sort of something else, or a new issue, for example. And people, yes, get tired of hearing, because especially those that aren't involved in the day-to-day are only hearing, oh, we need another 6 months, for example, to deliver this. Oh, this hasn't been delivered. And there's that, like you said, there's that fatigue of what's happening. All we hear is things are happening, but we don't know what is happening. It's keeping regular communication is very, very, very key. Keeping relevant, doing relevant updates as well. So there are teams that need the most relevant, more communication than others. There's those ones that will be the doers that will need the more communication. There's those influential people that obviously need also some relevant tailored communication. And there's those, it's quite easy as well to almost forget your own team. So for example, I assume, because I'm in supporter relations, that the supporter relations team and the data team are aware of everything that we're doing. But in fact, they're not, because we are a separate project team. And I need to make sure that especially this team, who are the main almost stakeholders in this project, are the ones that are kept the most up to date with any changes that are happening. What's really key as well is not inviting people for the sake of inviting people to a meeting or to a workshop. Sometimes we want to invite people just in case we need them, as opposed to let's go to them afterwards if we need them. People do get tired of attending, obviously, lots of workshops. So in this income project that we've just kicked off, we are doing 2 workshops per week, and we are giving a week break in between, and then 2 workshops per week. We're ensuring that each workshop doesn't go over 2 hours. We're ensuring that we are sharing an agenda in advance of the session, so people come in almost prepared, because we get the question of, am I needed in the next workshop? Well, yes, for this reason, yes, you absolutely are. But we are also sort of, for example, for today's workshop, we went to them on Monday saying, can you please check in with your team members, X, Y, and Z, so that when you come in, you absolutely know what you're doing. So as opposed to somebody sitting in that workshop not having the answers, they've come in prepared and they are absolutely needed. So we are making sure that each person is needed at every point. We are also launching this income project in quarterly sprints. Again, this is to make sure that we aren't bringing the same people again and again and again, that we are almost giving people a break. So they have that vision of, I'm going to be needed for the next quarter, definitely for X amount of workshops where we've, sent them in advance the dates and the times and what's needed from them. And then in between, we'll be checking in with you on X, Y, and Z. So they have that understanding. They can see the end of the tunnel. They know this project will be complete, or the sprint will be complete by the end of April. They know that their time will only be needed X amount of time. Therefore, there's less sort of tiredness or fatigue, like you've said, in terms of feeling that they're going to be involved for the next year ongoing. So it'll be sort of on and off.
Fantastic, Sarah. And I mean, so many great things. We've got lots of questions coming in, which we'll get to in a minute. But I think, again, of the so many great points there, but that not attending meetings for the sake of meetings. There's nothing worse. Kind of going, why am I here? Yeah, absolutely. Being very clear, you're here for a reason. So then, final question before we go to the questions that have been coming in from delegates. What kind of hints or tips would you give to any organisations that are planning their own projects or in the middle of projects and they're worried about bringing staff along with them?
I would always say selling. It's my first ever job, so there's something about understanding, how to sell, how to hype a project, how to bring sort of excitement around the deliverables and the outcome of such a project, even if obviously means going through a lot of pain in order to reach that project. Attending lots of briefings, face-to-face meetings. So, for example, at Mind, we have fortnightly fundraising meetings. We have a monthly all-staff briefing. We have team meetings that happen. It's about knowing when to go to each one of those and making sure there's that momentum happening, that people are hearing things, as opposed to leaving a comms, for example, not attending a fundraising meeting, for 6 months and then talking about it again isn't going to keep people that engaged. It's about providing that excitement behind the project. Having the difficult conversations, making sure that if you know specifically that there are people that aren't on board or teams that aren't on board, actually tackle them first, bring them on board first. If you physically can't do that in terms of it may not be appropriate, use your team, use your manager, use whoever you feel would be most appropriate. So as an example, I don't have regular meetings with our director of fundraising, but I do have them with our assistant director. And I know that our assistant director has them with our director of fundraising. So I made sure that I brought in our assistant director, or I funnel my comms through her in order to go to the final decision maker. And then we know that our director of fundraising will funnel it to her colleagues, who will then say, yes, here's the money, go ahead and do your project. So thinking smartly about who can influence who if you don't have that direct link, for example. Like Joyce mentioned earlier, documenting successes and sharing them, those are very, very important. Things become the new normal very quickly and people forget. When we delivered our CRM, the change to where we were with our care system, it cannot be imagined. But the people working on it today most probably forgot what it was like to work in care, and most probably forgot the journey that we went through. And unless we sort of share and remind people, this is where we were, for example, 30 hours per week on web donations versus 5 hours a week, and, you know, fully reconciled income, you know, whatever it is, that there are metrics that you can show people to remind them of the successes. And always ensure that the doers are brought on board. It's not only about senior management or about managers, it's also about the people that are doing the processes and the work that really need to be brought on board, because it can actually get stuck with them if they're not very on board with the change.
Brilliant, fantastic. So we've got lots of questions coming in, and I'll just give you a quick break for a second as I pull up the questions. So one of the questions that's come in is, so I'll just read this. So any tips on how to manage stakeholder mapping when your project is a large project covering a wide geographical area and needing many stakeholders? How's best to manage this and to record the information in a useful format?
We've not needed to do a project that was across sort of lots of geographical areas, but I would say it would probably be very key to almost have a lead in each area. So, for example, we have a very large department that we're working with, and they have various heads and various managers and about 100 officers in there, but we have come to an agreement to have almost the communications be funneled through one person, so that that person could be responsible for going. So I don't know whether you might have geographical perhaps managers, that you know, somebody that you can go to that would support you with understanding who are the best people in that area, who needs to be brought on, you know, within that area. And I would say keeping them engaged and informed as well, in terms of, you are our leads in Manchester, for example. I mean, I hope I've understood the question correctly, but I think dealing with one person who can support and funnel information through, and then you have an access to that group as well, is also very key. But I can imagine that there are, yes, lots of challenges in working with a large geographical area.
Perfect.
Joyce, have I answered the whole question?
I think so. And yeah, Sophia, if not, put in another one and let us know, but I think so, yes, absolutely. Another question on coming on the stakeholder map. So the question was, you know, once you put the stakeholder map together, do you need to revisit it with a view to adapting or changing it through the course of the project? Now, I know you mentioned you reviewed it the next day, but I suppose, do you look at it again, or is it that once you've kind of done it, that sort of first, you know, the first couple of days of it, what's kind of your view on that?
Definitely revisit. You'll be surprised that within perhaps a month in the project, you'll realize we didn't actually bring that team on board, or we didn't bring that person on board. So, for example, since lockdown, there's been a lot of new starters and new people at Mind that have started that I've never actually met. So I've been forcing those friendships in terms of, oh, I'm just looking to introduce myself, and then I'll talk about the project, and then I'll see how I can bring them on board. What happens is that you then start to realize, actually, this person is quite key, or this person could actually support us within this project. So yes, absolutely revisit. And as you're working in the project, you might also realize that somebody's influence or interest might change throughout the project. So you might sort of go, okay, this person is quite influential, but their interest is going down because they're not attending this meeting, they're not responding to my emails. What should we do, and how important are they to be able to bring them back on board? So absolutely, I would say obviously this is for the project managers and for your project team to be able to sort of sit down and have that conversation or do that thinking in terms of how, does it need to be revisited every week? No, but the comms plan, because it's attached to a stakeholder plan, is going to be revisited and looked at and updated on a weekly basis. So in a way, you'll always have oversight of this map.
And I think that's a really good point as well, about that the comms plan and the stakeholder map, they're very much interlinked, and that the stakeholder map is not kind of a document in isolation that doesn't refer to anything else and isn't relevant to anything else. I think that's a really good point as well. Another question was, have you got any advice on how best to collate feedback from staff to ensure it's a two-way process?
Yes, there's all types of ways to sort of collate feedback. You can do polls, you can do sort of face-to-face discussions, you can send an email, you can send a survey monkey. Like Joyce mentioned earlier, it's really key to ensure that we're not ignoring feedback, but it doesn't always mean that we have to act on every single bit of feedback. But what's key is to make sure that we are communicating that we have looked at this, and this is the reason why we are following this path, or that this feedback will be taken on board in, for example, phase 2, if it wasn't relevant at the time. In terms of collating feedback in general, so for example, with this current project, we've just started our pilot last month, so we are not at the stage of collating feedback yet, but I meet regularly with with managers or heads or other team members, so I am hearing that sort of feedback and I'm taking them straight into our project team. So we are being very open in terms of please come to us with any concerns, with any questions that you or your teams have, and we are being very serious about it in terms of we're not being nice, we mean it. And we are actually getting feedback. So after each workshop, we've either gotten feedback from our stakeholders in terms of, I felt that perhaps you could do it this way, or we felt perhaps you could do it that way. And then we would go back to that person, would make sure that the managers are aware, and yeah, we would basically make sure that everybody knows, that we are actually actioning on that feedback. We will probably be gathering some feedback from all the attendees after the sprint of workshop is finished, which is by next week, by the week after, to understand how useful they felt these workshops were. And yes, everything we take back to the team. We are also making sure that we are recording the feedback that we're getting, that we are capturing quotes, especially the good quotes that we get in, and so that we save them for future communications as well. So yes, sorry, we haven't actually done this at the moment. We've done it previously in terms of polls, we've done it previously in terms of conversations, but at the moment we are going to be actioning everything. But it's also to ensure that we don't have to always act on every single bit of feedback, but we have to feedback that we are taking it on board.
Fantastic, thank you, Sarah. And I'm conscious of that. I'm just throwing lots of questions at you now. One other one that's come in is, what if you're in a phase of the project, for example, CRM migration, so data migration, and you're experiencing a lot of barriers, difficulties, and fighting fires? How do you communicate to staff through that time? That's a cracking question, actually.
It sounds very familiar. We definitely have been there. It's actually about being open and transparent about the challenges that you're going through with your seniors. So I would ensure that our senior management, our project board, would understand the challenges that we are going through, and that they sign off on specific communications that we are going through. As we know, sometimes you can't explain to the whole organization that, okay, we've had a hiccup, this, it's going to cost us this amount, it's going to extend this amount of time, we need to be honest with specific people. So for example, for our CRM project, it was very relevant to let heads know who were part of our project board that we were having X amount of issues. These were the issues. This was why. This was our, our solution to the issue, and this is what we felt was going to happen at the end, because obviously we're not going with the issues without having thought about the solutions as well. And then we would get their buy-in before we would then go and communicate with everybody else that there's been X amount of hiccup, but this is what we're going to do about it. And I think it just goes back to that selling side of things, of making sure that people don't lose hope because there is a hiccup, and making people understand that these are complex projects. They're not a small solution. They're not a quick win, that there are going to be hiccups, and actually perhaps being honest from the very beginning, which we are telling everybody this is a very complex project. We know there are going to be hiccups along the way, but we are going to do our best to obviously mitigate each and every one of those, ensuring that they're on the risk register, making sure that everybody's aware of them, but communicating a specific message. I think obviously the general public, in terms of your stakeholders, don't need to know the ins and outs of your project, of the drama that's going on in the background, but they need to know exactly, that there's an issue, it means this, but this is our solution. This is what we're going to do, and we are going to keep you updated, and thank you for your support, and thank you for your understanding, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think that, as we all know, and I like to think that letting people know right from the start, this is a complex project, not having anybody under this perception that this is going to be plain sailing. Projects are difficult, and people need to be aware of that. And absolutely, to your point about when the problems do crop up, that not everybody in the organisation knows about it, that you're approaching it with, this is what has happened, but how we're mitigating it. It's a bit like that swan analogy, isn't it? Kind of the calm up front with the feet moving underneath, kind of thinking of sort of that approach.
Yes.
Conscious of time, but one of the other questions I wanted to cover off was, what are some of the best things about the organisational culture at Mind that you advise or think organisations could take for best practice, or sort of consider? So is there, I know every organisation's culture is different, but is there anything that you think would be good for other organisations to kind of think about, maybe?
In terms of culture?
Yeah, and it's a sort of a trickier one, but yeah, I was sort of interested to your thoughts on that.
I think the sense of urgency, I assume every charity, of course, has a sense of urgency. Every cause is extremely important, but bringing that in and ensuring that we're not talking about a project for a year and a half before it can begin, and we're not sort of just talking about things or planning things, about making sure that there's something that really needs to happen. We need to do our due diligence, absolutely. We need to start on the scope, absolutely. We need to understand what is happening right now, because we can't wait until 2025 to deliver this solution. We need to see results in the next year, in the next 2 years. So that sense of urgency, I think, works for all the organizations, because everybody needs to do things now, and we need to make our improvements now as well. In terms of Mind's culture, sort of, being, together, openness, etc. It perhaps, yes, bringing in everybody, making sure that you are liaising with everybody. That sometimes somebody like I said, may not be directly involved in the project, but it's good to have them on board. We have, for example, like I was talking about earlier about direct links. I don't have direct link to the director of finance, but I do to the head of finance. So through the head of finance, inviting her to be part of our project, I have now ensured that the director of finance has full oversight of the project, not just from his stakeholders, but actually from his team, and fully understanding what this means for the finance team. So togetherness, openness, making sure that, that you are also letting people know about the hardships, especially your, the influential people, not making it seem that everything is rosy and going well, when actually you are suffering in silence, because there are, so many issues that you need to solve. Actually, some people, it's their job to understand that there are hardships. Just because we've asked for funding for this project, it doesn't mean that, you know, we are going to make the project perfect, because things happen along the way. But yes, I would just go back to, I think, yeah, the sense of urgency and creating excitement on the change and what it means at the end of the day for our supporters and external customers, really.
Fantastic. And one last question, conscious of time, one last question. We've got lots more, but I think it's an interesting one, because it's something that comes up an awful lot on projects. So it's, how do we best communicate with and bring senior team along on a project when they're not the most technically minded? And I suppose for me, I think it's an interesting question, because very often when we start a project and people go, but I'm not technical, I don't understand, and that kind of well, you don't have to be technical. And kind of, do you see that a lot, and kind of how do you approach that? I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, we absolutely saw that ourselves. So I was in the CRM project team, and I managed our CRM and data services team, and I am not technical. I've worked in supporter relations. I understand our databases, of course. I understand our income processing and our stewardship processes, but I am not technical in terms of having been a data manager myself. So it's literally about the whole painting the picture. Speaking in layman's terms, senior management want results, want impact, want successes, want to know what it means for them and their team. So if we can't explain to senior management what this integration will mean with that tool, we would then explain it in a sense of, this means that your team or X teams will be able to do X, Y, and Z. They will, you know, we would save X amount of time on manual work, and it would mean cost saved of X amount to the organization. Sometimes it's quite hard to get those statistics, but you could still paint a picture without specifics. And you can also, so for example, for this project, we have said that we will know the full impact on our income and operations team at the end of the project. We know that it's going to save them time, but I have a feeling it's going to look, not a feeling, that's not the right, I know it's going to look completely different, and we'll be able to focus on value added activities, etc., etc. And this is the kind of stuff that we know senior management want to hear. When people say I'm not technical, absolutely you don't need to be technical. Yes, of course, we fully understand this, but however, the impact of this technicality means X, Y, and Z for your teams. We definitely need you on board. You know, we know that you'll be best suited to support us and guide us if we come across X, Y, and Z. So selling, I don't know if this is PC to say or not, almost stroking people's egos as well. So, you know, they may not feel, because nobody wants to feel like they don't understand what's happening within that room. But a project isn't about the technical side of things happens outside of that project board. The technical side of things happens, you know, in a locked room with your data experts and your project manager and your supplier trying to find a solution. Whereas in that room, you're talking about the decisions, you're talking about the scope, you're talking about the risks, you're talking about support. So yeah, some people do actually just want their ego stroked a little bit in terms of, you know, you're so important, we believe you'll add value to us. So yeah, I think that hopefully that works for you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. So conscious of time, so unfortunately we don't have time for any more questions. But just to say thank you so much. That's been absolutely fantastic. And there's just, I mean, to be honest, there's too many takeaways to kind of to do a summary. But I mean, you know, looking at the stakeholder map, the different ways you're engaging with people, I think all your points about the technical thing, because that comes up so much on projects. It's really, really common. So I like the sort of your approach and your thinking on that. And really, you know, I suppose to say it's always kind of be selling the project, having that enthusiasm and not being afraid to ask for sort of help and advice and reaching out to other people, because, you know, as you've rightly said, you don't know every single person in the organization. So you do need help from other people to help bring it in. So, you know, fantastic. So thank you very much, Sarah, for joining us today. Really appreciate it. It's been great. And thank you everybody else for joining us today. I hope that was useful. And hopefully we will see you on another session soon. So thank you again, Sarah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.